Good afternoon. Welcome to today's SCORE Fairfield County live webinar. I'm a human resources professional. Ask me anything. My name is Matt Krieger. I'm the host. I'm a SCORE mentor with the Fairfield County chapter. Presenter is Tracye Weeks. More on her in just one moment. If you could switch that slide to the next slide, please, Tracye. So SCORE is a national organization. It's a component of the Small Business Administration. There are 320 offices, 12,000 volunteers around the country. SCORE focuses on providing free mentoring and training services for small businesses and small business entrepreneurs all around the country. The SCORE Fairfield County, which is the chapter hosting this webinar today, is one of the best chapters in the country. We have about 130 volunteer mentors with a wide range of experience across all industries and business types. We do three things primarily. We provide one-on-one business mentoring. If you go to bit.ly.com/SCORE mentor, you'll be able to see the nature of the mentoring services that we provide, and we welcome you to reach out to us. We also provide business education programs. We do in-person workshops when permitted, and we look forward to doing them again. And we do online webinars like today, both live and on demand. Finally, we have an extensive collection of resources, including business tools, information, templates, business model plans, you name it, which you can get on fairfieldcounty.score.org or by contacting us. Moving on to today's presenter, maybe move that slide. Tracye Weeks is a resourceful and results-oriented human resources professional who provides daily value to clients in the areas of thought leadership, leadership coaching, training, and implementing best practices in HR or highly performing organizations. She often serves as the interim HR leader for clients who value her unique approach and creative solutions to solving organizational challenges. In these roles, Tracye advises leaders on strategy related to organizational structure, policies, risk assessments, and risk aversion. Additionally, she enjoys managing creative initiatives that fit into the bigger long-term picture of operational goals. Over the past 15 years, Tracye has supported both for-profit and not-for-profit organizations with strategic planning, oversight, and people relations. She has a creative problem-solving ability that has helped save organizations over $1 million in operational spend by implementing solutions that are not only effective but efficient. She's the former HR leader of a Fortune 500 company and previously led an educational nonprofit. Tracye is a certified senior professional in human resources, SPHR. She holds a Society of Human Resources Senior Certified Professional designation. That's an SHRM, SCP, obviously. Tracye earned a Bachelor of Science from Albany State University in Business, a Master of Arts in Mass Communication from University of Georgia, and is currently pursuing her doctorate in human resources with Walden University. She is a certified diversity trainer and certified green belt in Lean Six Sigma processes. Hope you came with questions. When you have them, we encourage you to fire them off in the chat window, and I'll turn it over to Tracye.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. First of all, it is great to be here today. I am a self-professed HR nerd, so I love questions, and please come with the questions you have. This is an open forum. A lot of times in my job and in my consulting, especially leaders of organizations just don't know where to ask their questions or what to ask. And so I kind of serve that purpose of being that thought partner, of being that strategic partner to help leaders decide what's best for their organizations, not only in the realm of human resources, but how human resources should also be a strategic part of your organization. So following up from what Matt said, in my years of experience as HR, I have worked for-profit, large organizations owned by Warren Buffett, where the HR department has consisted of 17 to 20 people. And I've also been an HR department of one in what I like to call mission-driven organizations. So those are your nonprofit organizations who usually are serving some part of our community or serving a purpose. And that's really where I've kind of found my niche. I enjoy working with the leaders of those mission-driven organizations to just help them grow and fulfill their missions. I would say my sweet spot is actually in leadership training and building company strategy. So I do a lot of thought partnership and just helping people think through what they want to do next. I've also served as an executive level coach and also a doctoral candidate. So we'll move on, and please put your questions in the box. So what exactly is HR? When you think about HR in your organization, what do you think HR does for you? And this slide is showing us what HR should do for us. And if you read it from the inside in, we should really be a strategic partner with what you're trying to accomplish at your organization. A long time ago, HR was seen as administrative as well as, I would say, tactical and operational. And though there are tactical and operational things that have to get done, right? People have to have their benefits. People need to know about leave and what's available to them. Your perfect HR leader should really be a partner in helping you build strategy and bridging strategy and accomplishing those goals. Thank you, Felicia, for the question. I'm going to divert to your question so that I can answer that. So Felicia says, I'm a part of a growing movement working to modernize the funeral industry. And I'd like to create a program for corporate HR as I see a huge lack of information. Do you have advice on how to approach this with HR pros? Absolutely, Felicia. So first of all, I want to say creating a program for a corporate HR program, if I understand you correctly, you have to think about two things, right? Do you want this program to be decentralized or do you want it to be centralized? There are several things to consider when you're building that question and building out what your corporate HR division looks like. How many funeral homes or how many funeral services do you offer? And do those require specialized training? Are they in different states or different areas or different regions with different laws? Would you be served better by having a specialist than having a generalist? Do you want to take a kind of has spider legs who's over and working with these other entities that you're building? And do you want to share one philosophy, or is it okay that those philosophies differ? So the first thing I would say is figure out if you want it to be decentralized or if you want it to be centralized, and then dig into exactly what that means. Some centralized programs can build consistency, but it also can make your HR department feel cold, right? And not approachable and not aware, and people feel like they don't have a resource or an advocate that they can go to. Decentralized programs, on the other hand, give people an opportunity to build a relationship with your HR programs and your HR employees. However, if they're too centralized, they can get away from the central mission of the overall organization. So that's definitely something that you can delve into with any leader, any strategic HR leader that you hire for your organization. Great question. Okay. Help you figure out if you're building a decentralized or a centralized strategy. Your HR departments, people, corporations, how you set up this structure, they're going to be responsible for a number of things, but most of these things should fall within this chart. And depending on if you're hiring specialists or generalists, no problem at all, you're actually going to figure out what pieces of this pie they will take care of or be a part of. The overarching theme, and if you look at the top of this, the ring around the top says legal compliance. So we'll talk more about why this is important, but your best strategic HR leaders are very interested or even have a background in legalities. I myself was an instructor of business law. And there's a crossover that happens that's invaluable when you're working in a strategic capacity in an organization. We are advocates for all employees at the organization, but our number one mission is to decrease risk. And so we manage and engage employees at a level that is taking the least risk possible, warning of threats, looking for opportunities for the organization to be a best places to work, but also warning our management teams and our leadership about what threats are on the horizon. The next slide. So speaking of generalists and speaking of specialists and strategic advisors on HR, a lot of times we just say things like, we need HR. And what the next question really is and should be is, what do we need and want HR to do? Because that will differ per every organization. For example, do you need a generalist? A generalist is someone who is familiar and has experience across one who can effectively, they can do compliance, they can do strategic management, they know benefits. So you will get someone who has a knowledge base and experience in all of those. Those are usually your ones that cost more, right? Because they've worked in these areas and they've worked in HR for a long time and they have expertise. What I see mostly is that organizations don't hire the right fit. Because if you're in a small organization and you have a successful management and leadership team, do you need a strategic level HR person? Or do you need to make sure that the employees are being taken care of and that HR is working? And if so, it's not yet at that point of strategic leadership, though you can certainly grow them into that. But take advantage of the savings you get when you employ a generalist versus employing a director and a manager. I myself, when I'm interviewing for any new consultant role, I am upfront and honest about me being a strategic leader. And so if the organization needs someone that is more administrative and geared towards administrative, I'm not the right fit. And it's okay to say that. So generalists will be well-rounded. Think about that chart that we just saw on the previous screen. They're going to be able to do or lead a little bit of everything. But some organizations find out that they actually need specialists. And a specialist would be, say you're working in a very litigation. Right now I have a lot of clients that are in California, and as we know, California is like its own world. And this particular organization, when it comes to labor relations and unions. So instead of me being the expert at unions, which I am not, though I have experience, I chose to hire and partner with a special. All they do is work with relations, because that's what Lisa has a question. How many employees would a company need before they should think about onboarding a manager full-time? Before getting to that point, what options would a small company have for getting the benefits of an HR function without a full-time role? And would that just be a part-time role? Or are there other options? Perfect questions, Lisa. So let's delve into that a little bit. So here's usually what I see. A company starts as a small startup company and is very successful. And within 5 years, they have 50 employees. They've blown up is what I call it. What happens is when people are at 2 or 3 people, they normally say, because we don't really know what HR is, yeah, you can do HR, because we think it's very administrative and tactical, right? You can process paychecks, or you can enter up to 50 people. We realize that that's really not an option, and it's not the right structure for us at that time. So what I usually dealt with have around 20 employees. So somewhere between that 20 to 30 mark is when we really need to start engaging a strategic HR leader. And HR is not cheap. It also is probably not the money maker of your organization. So a lot of times people skip over that function until it's necessary, until they have a lawsuit, until there's an EEO complaint. And by that point, it's really too late. So what happens if you have a 20-person organization, but you're not at a point where you feel like you want to or can afford a full-time HR person or leader? Part-time, as you mentioned, is absolutely an option. And what I do is I'm a consultant. So there are 5 to 6 organizations that I work with. They get the benefit of working with a heavily seasoned strategic HR leader, but we are based on the time, the allotment of time that I spend with them a month. So for each of those 5 organizations, I have approximately 20 hours per organization. They only have 20 to 30 people. So that's enough time for me to actually build foundational HR and them not having to employ a full-time HR person. So there are plenty of HR consulting companies and just people who do HR consulting who will do it on a part-time basis.
Tracye?
You also can engage and you need to do a compensation. Yes.
I'm sorry,
Can you
when
hear
you're
me?
done with your sentence, we had another question. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, okay, that's okay. Say in your organization, you need to build a compensation philosophy, right? You have 20 people now, and you just need to make sure everyone's equitable and being paid equitable. You can actually engage an HR consultant to just do that project. So they come in, they do that project, and they leave. And then another trigger of when you need to engage HR would really be state laws as it regards to compliance and what things are applicable at certain levels. For instance, 80 AAA, which is the Accommodation Act, is applicable when you have 1 employee. However, in most organizations that are outside of California and DC, you don't have to do FMLA until you have 50 employees. So the sweet spot is somewhere between that 20 and 30. Hope that answers your question, Lisa.
Tracye, we have another question.
Matt, what's the next question?
Sure. The question is, for businesses that are so small that they can't even afford a consultant, are there subscription services where they can call on demand or ask an HR expert for policy questions and help on demand on an as needed only basis, perhaps for some small monthly fee?
Yes. So the organization I work for actually offers that type of service. So we are not unique in that. It is a unique function of my organization, but yes. So we have what we call on-demand services. It's just like kind of paying a retainer. And for 1 retainer, you get access to just call and ask questions as needed. But there are also free resources, right? One of our accrediting bodies called SHRM, which is one that I'm accredited through, actually offers like a question and answer help desk. And you can get a lot of free answers before you have to pay for those answers. You can even join SHRM for, I think it's like $200 a year. And then also I would look into those firms that are doing things pro bono, and even students like myself. For example, I'm a doctoral candidate. I have a lot of experience in HR, but through my university and my program, I'm actually consulting on a pro bono basis. So those things are all options as well. Any other questions, Matt?
Nope, not at this time. Oh, there's one that just popped up. Question is,
Okay.
You help companies find and hire full-time HR talent.
This is going a little bit back to what Lisa asked. Oh, okay. Absolutely. So right now, as it stands, when I'm engaging with people in a consultant company, so I just completed about 60 hours, really delving into what their HR department needs to look like. And the deliverable from that assessment was that I developed a job description for the perfect HR person for them. And we actually hired that person by the time we were done delivering the assessment. Sometimes I go into organizations and provide temporary services for 2 to 3 months until they find a leader. And then sometimes I work as just kind of a recruiter to help them identify, because, right, they might not know the right questions to ask, to help them identify who would be the best leader for them. So we can do short-term engagements as well as long-term engagements. Good question, Elliot. To that question on this slide, when it talks about HR jargon, it really goes hand in hand. When you hire somebody to help you find somebody, or if you're looking for someone, these are the things that you want to make sure are included on that job description, or you are saying to yourself, this is important that you at least know. So we call them core competencies. HR, meaning as an HR person, these are the things that you really should be responsible for and really have experience in. And really that's going to include that your HR person is a champion of culture and that they are helping you as a leader focus and build that, retain and attract the right of these types of actions, like the WARN Act. And you want to make sure your HR person is versed legally in knowing that, so that they can decrease the amount of risk you take on. Your HR person should be approachable. Old school HR, there was a lot of paperwork, a lot of processing, a lot of head down. New school HR, I spend 50% of my time talking to people, getting to know them, and having them understand that I'm credible, but also trustful that become big issues for the organization. In that scope, we always believe in 80-20 rule. What that means is that 20% of the people are giving 80% of the problem. And if you have an HR person in your organization who's focused on analysis and really focusing on trending, they'll be able to help you narrow down where those 80% of the problems are and help you resolve that. And just lastly, what we're seeing mostly is that most organizations are requiring or preferring credentials. The reason we're preferring our credentials is that you can't even take the HR certification tests until you've reached a level of knowledge, experience, skills, and in your field. So this is not, if you have a credentialed HR person, you can bet that they have spent at least 5 or 10 years in their safe areas really pulling down on this work. And I'll tell you, this is the hardest test I've ever taken, and it only has a 40% pass rate. So that can kind of tell you you're looking for an HR person. So I will wait for other questions to come in the box, but if not, here's some received early that we can just go through. I want to make sure I answer for you. So we get a lot of questions about exempt versus non-exempt, or overtime versus not overtime. And so that is one of the things that gets us in a lot of trouble in the labor statistics and requirements when it comes to exempt versus non-exempt. And there are a lot of laws and a lot of clarifications now on what makes a position exempt or non-exempt. But here's what I most often see, especially from my leaders and my CEOs. We want to classify every position as exempt because that means you're not as an assistant. I see it all the time. Well, according to the DOL, in order for a position to be exempt, they have to have the authority to make decisions without checking with anyone. And if you think about most assistants, usually the person they're assisting is the decision-making authority. So most of the time you don't see exempt level administrative employees. They're almost always non-exempt. When you're non-exempt, it means that you're overtime eligible. And in most cases, in every state, the DOL requires that you pay them for all of the time, every minute that they work, and you have to track every minute that they work. So that's when you see time clocks or people clocking in and clocking out, because we do have to pay them. And they're eligible for overtime after 40 hours. Work a position from being non-exempt to exempt. That's very simple. What I warn people about is met often. So you don't want to bring someone on as non-exempt and then every 6 months you're changing them from part-time to full-time to exempt or non-exempt. It's easier and safer to bring them on as non-exempt, pay them as overtime, and as we proceed through the relationship, if their responsibilities, if you start to lean on them more and they have a little more autonomy, then you can reclass the position as an exempt position. On the flip side of that, I question, what's the difference between an employee and a consultant? And once again, there are major differences. New guidelines actually just released this week, which make it clearer, right? So as an employee, I'm going to be too eligible. Basically means the company is going to be paying my taxes, my wages for me. As a consultant, I am not. I'm independent of the organization. I am responsible for paying my own taxes, my own wages. But as a consultant organizations, our people say, well, she's a consultant, right? She's an independent consultant. But the person has to be at work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. They have to work from a specific office and they report to someone. Even if you are listing that person as a consultant, in a court of law, that person would be recognized as an employee. And so I've had several judgments at organizations where the organization has had to go back and pay this person because they've worked as a consultant for the last 6 years, and now they owe them benefits, they owe them back pay, they owe them bonuses, they owe them retirement contributions because they were directing their work. Normally, when I'm in organizations and we're hiring employees as well as consultants, I make sure that we deliver a training to everyone regarding, hey, this is what you're responsible for. Here's how you direct your work. Here's your classification, and here's what that means, as well as to the supervisor. And Elliot asks, are consultants also responsible for their own benefits? Yes, Elliot, they are. If they are a true consultant, the only thing you are doing is paying them for the work that you have contracted them to do. So I recommend a consultant agreement, which clearly lists what they're responsible for, right? These are the tasks that I will accomplish within the next time frame. This is how much you will pay me for those tasks. Outside of that, consultants control how they get the tasks done. So if you have someone in an organization who is reporting to you every day, who is calling these, they're not consultants, they are employees. All right. Are all employees entitled to earn leave was another question that I received. The answer here is yes and no, right? It really depends on what your company policies are and what the company policies state. However, depending on what state you're in, can also determine what leave you have to give. For example, in DC, you are not required to provide any leave benefits except for sick leave. And that's because DC has a sick and safe leave law, which says that per every hour you work, you have to give a percentage of hours. In cities that don't have leave or don't have leave policies, but you will always see an allowance of sick leave in DC. And so that's different for every particular state. It's also different for every company. The good thing is that handbooks also can supersede some of these things. So if you have an employee who says, well, I want vacation and we don't earn vacation, if it's clearly identified in your handbook that the company as a whole does not award or earn vacation, that takes precedence and will also help you win that argument. However, what you don't want to do is award things differently. So what I see in some organizations, our employees have a different classification of leave, and then they hire a new CFO, and the CFO says, well, I want all of my leave loaded up front, and I want 6 weeks, not 4 weeks of leave. Our answer to that should be no, because we want to be consistent. However, what we can do is create a new leave category specifically for executives. That means that all executives in the organization can be on one leave plan, and all other employees in the organization can be on one leave plan. So my job is to help you find a way to do what it is you want to do and make sure you have the least exposure possible when doing it. Are all employees paid for breaks and lunch? This goes back to our exempt versus non-exempt classification. So built into your daily schedules, most people either work a 7.5 or 8-hour day. Usually built into that about 1 or 2 breaks and then usually a 30-minute lunch. Per the labor laws, you actually don't have to pay for hours of work. You are owed 15, we build out schedules, which is why you find out that lunches, if they're given in the increment of 30 or 1-minute hours, are usually unpaid lunches or not paid for because of those reasons. When the most important thing is if somebody is working through a lunch or a break and they're classified as non-exempt, then those employees have to be paid once again for every minute that they're working. So that's why that's important. All right, see if there are any other questions so far. Nope, okay. So continuing on this slide, one of the last questions I received is about leave of absences and can I afford it? So when we're working, we have is essential, right? You have someone that is a grant processor and they're approving grants. So if that person goes out, it significantly impacts your business. And a lot of times it's not something we can absorb as an organization. It puts a strain on the organization. However, there are very clear and specific laws about the types of leaves as into our employees. The first one is ADAAA. That's the Americans with Disabilities Accommodations Act, which basically says that if anyone has any condition that affects any life function, they are eligible to request an accommodation, and leave can be an accommodation. So if I'm that employee who processes grants and I need to be off for 12 weeks, legally, you cannot say no to that employee, even if you are not a company that has enough employees eligible for FMLA or DC FMLA or emergency FMLA. None of those things allow you then find a way to fill that hole for the number of weeks that are approved. Now, under ADAAA, you can say as an organization, I can't afford for this person to be off for 12 weeks. You can say, but I can give you 4 weeks and we can figure out what works best for the organization. You are allowed that bargaining power. Secondly, the most important thing is you don't have to pay someone for a leave of absence. So I have some companies I work with who are very generous. They afford employees 6 weeks off for absences, paid leave, 12 weeks off for absences, paid leave. But then I have others that can't afford it. They're social service organizations. They're paid for by Medicaid or Medicare or grants, and they can't afford leave. So the employee is able to either use their leave or take a leave of absence without pay. And that is legal, perfectly legal. Okay. Keep your questions coming. I'm looking at the chat box. Let's talk about one of my favorite things and one of my, because this is usually all of the drama in an organization. So we call this compliance, basically human resources investigations. And what are some of the things that would cause us to investigate in organizations? What are we looking for? What are we hearing? What are we backing into? Here's some of the things people say to me. And if you notice, the title of this slide is, here are things you're probably better off not mentioning to HR, but we have found ourselves in positions where people tell us everything. So the first thing is, well, I found a second job at night. Well, why is that a problem? Well, now I'm thinking, tell me the employee, how is that affecting your day job? Are you performing at 100%, performing at stellar in this job? Is the second job you have a conflict of interest to the job that you're doing with me? And all those questions get placed as an HR professional where I'm asking them additional questions. So I need to know where you're working. I need to know how many hours. I need to know if it's related to the business that you're doing with us to make sure you're not violating any of the policies. How do we solve for this up front? As a strategic HR leader, when I'm developing your policies and handbooks, I'm going to put a policy in place about working second jobs. I'm also going to put in a conflict of interest policy, which will help guide the culture and the understanding of everyone at your company is responsible for and what they should be responsible for doing and knowing about our policies and requirements. The second thing I hear a lot, please don't tell. Hello, is everyone still here?
Tracye, you cut out. We're here.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I think that was probably my connection. I apologize, everyone. Let me share my screen again. Okay. Apologies for that. So we were talking about human resources investigations and some of the good stories or not so good stories that I get as an HR professional. So one of the other things, when people start a conversation off with me and they say, please don't tell, I stop them right there. And you wouldn't believe the things that I've heard. One of the things that I remember the most in HR was I worked for a company that was very large, and there were very specific policies about everything. One of the policies was that because we were a company that dealt with confidential information, you could not use any of the systems to look up information on people, right? It would be a violation of policy, and it would be a violation of their expectation and trust in us as a company. She had been in a hit and run accident in our parking lot at the company. And the person who hit her would not call her back. She wouldn't call the adjuster back. She was not being participative at any point at resolving this claim. That person was also an employee. During the conversation, the employee says to me, well, please don't tell anyone, but I looked her up in our system. And immediately I knew she had violated company policy. So my job, right, is to be trustworthy, confidential, but also I'm looking out for risk of the organization. That's literally what my job is. And so though this person came to me because she advised me that she had violated a company policy, we had to actually put her on corrective action according to what the policy was. So sometimes it's best to stay quiet about certain things because confidentiality goes only so far when it has something to do with risk management in an organization. But your best HR people know how to manage the expectations of both. So I tell employees, you're welcome to come here, you're welcome to vent, you're welcome to scream. If there's any point in the conversation where I think we need to take this further, I will stop you and let you know so that you can decide if you want to continue with the conversation so that we're all on the same page about what my role really is. The next thing I hear a lot, my FMLA leave was the best vacation yet. Now, if we're on vacation, I think everyone knows if you have FMLA, you're supposed to be out for sick leave or something reverting to being sick. I have had people slide under my door screenshots of people at amusement parks while they were out on FMLA. I have had people call out for a migraine under FMLA, and then they're at a concert the same night. So it makes me question your trustworthiness or question if you can be trusted as an employee. And it doesn't build for a great relationship between you and the organization. And the last thing that you probably wouldn't believe I've heard more times than not is I slept with and I stopped them there. Something I don't need to know. I absolutely don't need to know if it's within an organization or inside of an organization. This has gone bad a lot of for employees. This has resulted in a lot of investigations. And I'll tell you, when I'm starting an investigation, I tell people, you know, kind of like a detective, it's best for you to be honest and upfront with me when I'm asking the initial questions. Because lying is not going to help you when we're deciding what the consequence is. I've heard it all. Supervisors going with people that report to them. I've investigated peer-to-peer relationships where there's quid pro quo. I've had people play like they just don't understand what I'm saying or what I'm asking them. I even had to define what intercourse meant to one person because they just didn't know what intercourse meant. So a lot of times people not owning up and not being truthful and then just telling us things that we don't need to know puts them in a worse position. All right. So here's another hot topic, and you probably know this. You've probably seen it in the HR universe in the last year, especially since the protests started happening in 2020. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is one of the things that is really large and out there these days. So we get a lot to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion. Going back to that list of specialists versus generalists, there's absolutely a specialty now of diversity experts, diversity, equity, and inclusion experts, and how to make sure that it's not a one-time thing in your organization. We're doing a lot of training on unconscious bias. What does that mean? What does it look like? And then how is it reverberated throughout our organization? For example, I have organizations that post positions, but they don't post the salary ranges in positions, which can actually be seen as a violation of equity and really degrades from the organization's transparency or level of transparency. I've had men in organizations refer as women as girls, just because in the era they grew up with, girls and darling and honey was acceptable. And so when you're sitting in a boardroom as a CEO and your employee is calling you darling, sometimes it's not that funny. But it doesn't mean that that person is a bad person or racist, or that person is being manipulative or doing this on purpose. And a lot of times we just have to have conversations. Let people know what the expectation is, define the expectation, and then move on to behave differently. Diversity, equity, inclusion also should flow through your policies and procedures. So think about performance management. I recommend a diversity, equity, and inclusion review on all of your policies. Have you looked at your handbook to make sure that you have weeded out unconscious bias? Your policies and procedures to make sure you have DE&I included. Are your hiring practices one-sided, right? If you're looking at a hiring matrix of someone that applied for a job and everyone that applied is mean, you probably have. And so taking deep dives to make sure this is ingrained in your organization, really where we're seeing the influx. Okay, topic. And we are having a lot of conversation even now, right? Because we're not through COVID-19 and all those things that COVID-19 brought us. COVID has had a dramatic effect on how we work. I mean, just think about it. On, I think it was March 14th of last year, we have now, everyone has gone virtual. Mostly everyone is working from home. And we are dealing with the effects of what working from home means, what virtual teams mean. In the beginning, it was fun, but now we're starting to experience burnout. How do you build culture and foster a community of connectivity from behind a computer screen? We're probably all tired of the happy hours and the water cooler talks. And I know at the end of the day, I don't even want to sign on to a screen because I'm on it all day during this time. And psychological impacts that it's having not only on our employees, but our communities and the communities we serve, right? Unemployment is at a record high. We are seeing mental health companies do exceptionally well in this environment because people have now had breakdowns. Our suicide rates are even higher because people are more isolated. They're not having that connection and the opportunity to connect with people, and they're getting depressed and being in depressive states. How do you address that as a supervisor and a manager? And having your finger on that, finger on the pulse of your organization is important. Check on that person. Call them. Wellness checks to people at least every 2 weeks, especially to those that I know live alone. So I have a log of people in organizations who are single and live with no one. And I do what's going on, what can I help you with every other week, just to touch base and make sure they know we're here to support them in any way that we can. When you're inside an organization, it's easy to shut it out, right? You kind of leave it at the door, you're focused on work. But we're now in positions where our work has been infused with our work, or our work has been infused with home, excuse me. So what that means is while I'm signing on to a webinar, I also have a first grader that I'm trying to get into class, while I also have my Zoom ringing as well as my virtual phone ringing with someone trying to get in touch with me all at the same time. And how I present to you in that moment may be very different, and us being aware and accepting of that is kind of where we have to evolve to as leaders in organizations. Other things that are moderating some of these changes: age, race, ethnicity, gender, family status, cultural differences. All of these things we're seeing effects. I've had a client who was on the phone managing and supervising one of his employees, and we knew that their home life wasn't the best, but you could literally hear the husband berating the wife on the phone. And you can't work through that, right? So we ended the call, called the person one-on-one, and first just make sure they were safe and well before we tried to continue any business. We can't ignore that. But those were conversations and questions we wouldn't have had to deal with if we were inside of an organization. And then you have fatigue that's happening to leaders, managers who are also dealing with everyone else's problems while they're dealing with their own. So while I'm coaching an employee, my 7-year-old all the time, and he needs help just getting lunch for the day because I have turned into the lunchroom, of course, like everybody else. And those things, what we have to reacclimate ourselves to, as well as our organizations. We had one question come in about the CARES Act, so about COVID-19. Was enacted in 2019 for a lot of allowances, I would say, for organizations, for employees, basically for tax credits and basically for time to deal with the effects of COVID for them and their families. It did present some challenges for organizations. It also submitted some challenges when it comes to coding time as well as paying for time. So the CARES Act expired, and because the mandatory parts of the CARES Act expire. However, until today, it has not been changed. So there is an option for organizations to continue participating until the end of March of 2021, in which case you will still receive tax credits. But what is it that you have to do? So according to the CARES Act, every employee, for those who are over 50 employees, under 50 employees, are afforded a total of 80 hours that's paid by the organization. So that's what you're going to code. That's what you're going to pay them for. They don't have to use leave. It doesn't come out of their leave bank, but the organization pays them. And the organization then can produce tax credits based on that work. The daily limit is also $200 a day. So for those high paying and high performing employees, the ones who are over that limit, there's a little more back end calculation that happens with your financial CFO and your accountants to get to the right tax credit number. However, what happens if you have someone who's out of the office longer than 80 hours? So after that 80 hours, the company then is responsible for providing 2/3 pay, and the employee is responsible for either paying, taking leave without pay, or using their leave, bring them whole for 1/3 pay. The employee can claim the 2/3 leave against their tax credit status. The employee then actually uses less leave than they normally. So think about if I was out for 4 weeks. Those 2 weeks normally would cost me 80 hours of leave, but I'm only going to have to pay one. So your HR department has to be central and definitely in communication with your finance department, have the records you need to claim those tax credits. So we will take a few moments before I turn it back to May 1. Companies make getting COVID tested and or vaccinated to return to the office. Can they demand an employee be present in the office while the pandemic continues? That is a great question, Elliot. It's an unpopular question, but it's also one that is in development right now. Companies can make COVID testing and vaccinations mandatory. It doesn't necessarily feel great, especially to some employees, but employees are in the position where they have to decide, or are they not? So when I have a CEO who's asking this question, legally, my advice is yes, you can make this mandatory. However, how is that going to affect your organization? Let's think about reasonably, right? Is it 100% necessary that the person is here? Can they do their job effectively from home? We should be considering and making those allowances first. But there are some companies I have that never shut down because they're social service organizations and their work cannot be done from home because their work is being in homes with people. And so as an organization, we're making sure to provide PPE for them and all the things they need to be at work. Can a company demand an employee be present in the office while it continues? The answer again is yes. The laws are on the side of companies when it comes to these types of things at this time. I expect changes now that the administration has changed, and we are all keeping our eye and our ears on the process those changes will be. Because I expect they will be more employee friendly, but for right now, they are company friendly, and yes, they can. Great questions. Thank y'all all so much for having me and just listening to me today. I hope that you were definitely able to get your questions answered. And if you want to reach out to me in the future, my name is and available. I look forward to hearing from you. Matt, I'll turn it back over to you.
Tracye, thank you so much for your presentation today. And most importantly, thank you
Matt,
for those who attended. We hope you got a lot of value out of this. Very, very important. You're going to get a survey email following the webinar. Please, please fill it out. It's really, really important to us and to our presenters. Want to also remind you again that our SCORE chapter in Fairfield County at fairfieldcounty.score.org is a wonderful resource for you and for your colleagues in small business. We have mentoring, we have training, we have education, and we have business resources. We encourage you to go to fairfieldcounty.score.org and contact us. We encourage you to go to bit.ly.com/score mentor and contact us. We also encourage you, if you have follow-up questions for Tracye, to email her at the email address shown on the left of your screen. Want to quickly make you aware of an upcoming workshop. It is tomorrow. It is called a SCORE Showcase by Cliff Enico, From Dartmouth to Wall Street to Small Business Expert. This will be presented by frequent SCORE presenter and attorney Cliff Enico. It is tomorrow, January 22nd at 12 p.m. If you go to the aforementioned website, fairfieldcounty.score.org, you will be able to sign up for that. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. We appreciate it so much, and please remember to do the survey.